I thanked my grandfather for the $100 check. He stopped carving. The turkey looked me straight in the eye and said the gift I wired you was $500,000. My mother dropped her glass of red wine, shattering crystal all over the white tablecloth. My brother started choking on a dinner roll, and my sister-in-law went pale as a ghost. That was the moment I realized my family was not just toxic, they were criminals. Before I tell you how I got my money back and sent them all to prison, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight your own blood for what was rightfully yours. My name is Maya, and at 30 years old, I had spent my entire life being the invisible Dubois. In a family obsessed with image wealth and social climbing, being a practical data architect who preferred hoodies to haute couture made me the black sheep. I lived in a modest apartment, drove a reliable sedan, and saved every penny I earned. My mother Lorraine called me boring. My younger brother Tyrell called me cheap. But I called myself independent. Thanksgiving at the Dubois mansion was always a theatrical performance, not a dinner. My mother treated it like a royal coronation. The driveway was filled with leased luxury cars. The dining room was illuminated by a chandelier that cost more than my college tuition. The table was set with sterling silver and imported china. Every detail was designed to scream old money, even though I knew the family fortune was dwindling thanks to my mother's spending habits and Tyrell's failed business ventures. I walked into the dining room wearing a simple navy dress. I was 5 minutes late, a sin my mother usually punished with a 20-minute lecture. But today, she barely looked at me. She was too busy fussing over Tyrell. My 27-year-old brother was lounging in his chair wearing a designer suit that was a little too tight, checking his reflection in a spoon. His wife Becca was next to him, scrolling through Instagram and sipping champagne. Becca was a woman who had turned marrying into the Dubois family into a full-time career. She looked up at me, smirked, and said, "Nice of you to join us, Maya. We were just talking about Tyrell's new investment firm. He is going to be the next Elon Musk." I sat down at my assigned seat, which was as always at the far end of the table closest to the swinging kitchen door. I ignored Becca. I was used to her passive-aggressive jabs. I was just there to see one person. My grandfather, Elijah. Grandpa Elijah was 82 years old. He was the only reason we had any money at all. He had built a real estate empire in Atlanta from scratch, brick by brick. He was a man of few words, sharp eyes, and iron principles. But lately my mother had been telling everyone he was losing his mind. She claimed he was senile, forgetful, and confused. She had even hired a private nurse to watch him, effectively keeping him isolated in the east wing of the house. Grandpa sat at the head of the table. He looked frail, thinner than the last time I saw him. His hands trembled slightly as he held the carving knife. But when he looked at me, his eyes were clear. He gave me a small, secret wink. Lorraine clapped her hands, demanding attention. "All right, everyone, let us say grace. We have so much to be thankful for. Tyrell's business is booming. Becca is redecorating the guest house. And Maya, well, Maya is still employed, which is a blessing, I suppose." We bowed our heads. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to tune out the hypocrisy. After the prayer, the food was served. It was a feast, but the air was thick with tension. I ate quietly, listening to Tyrell brag about a penthouse he was looking at downtown. He talked about square footage and marble floors, throwing around numbers that made my head spin. I knew for a fact he had zero income. I wondered which credit card he was maxing out this time. Toward the end of the meal, I decided to break my silence. I wanted to thank Grandpa. A week ago, I had received a card in the mail from him. It was a sweet, shaky, handwritten note wishing me luck on my house hunting. Inside was a personal check for $100. It was not much, especially in this housing market, but it was the thought that counted. It touched me that he remembered I was trying to buy my first home. I cleared my throat. The table went quiet. "Grandpa," I said, leaning forward. "I wanted to say thank you. I got your card in the mail last Tuesday. The check for $100 was really sweet. It will help with the moving boxes when I finally find a place. The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Grandpa Elijah stopped carving the turkey. He slowly set the knife down on the platter. The metal clinked against the china, a sharp sound that echoed in the quiet room. He turned his head slowly to look at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. He spoke slowly, his voice raspy but distinct. $100. What are you talking about, Maya? I smiled nervously. The check, Grandpa. You sent me a check for $100. Grandpa Elijah shook his head. No, child. I did not send you $100. I instructed your mother to wire you the gift. I sold the commercial lot on Peach Street last month. I sent you $500,000. The world seemed to stop spinning. I stared at him. $500,000. 500,000. Before I could process the number, chaos erupted. To my right, my mother Lorraine gasped. Her hand jerked and her goblet of expensive red wine tipped over. The dark liquid splashed across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like a pool of blood. It dripped onto her lap, ruining her silk dress, but she didn't even notice. She was staring at Grandpa with eyes wide with panic. Across the table, Tyrell started choking. He had taken a bite of a roll just as Grandpa spoke, and now he was hacking his face, turning red. Becca slammed her hand on his back, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Lorraine, her face drained of all color, her mouth hanging open in horror. Grandpa Elijah didn't look at the mess. He kept his eyes locked on mine. I gave the account number to Lorraine last week, he said, his voice gaining strength. She told me she wired it on Monday. Maya, did you not get the money? I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I looked at my mother. She was scrambling to her feet, grabbing a napkin to dab at the wine, but her hands were shaking violently. Dad? You are confused again, Lorraine said, her voice high and shrill. She forced a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. Oh, poor Daddy. His memory is going. He thinks he sold the lot on Peach Street. Dad, you sold that lot 10 years ago. Remember? She looked at me, her eyes pleading and threatening at the same time. Maya, don't upset him. He has been having these episodes all week. Hallucinations, confusing the past with the present. Tyrell finally stopped choking. He took a gulp of water and jumped in, his voice hoarse. Yeah, Grandpa. You are tripping. $500,000. That is crazy talk. Nobody has that kind of money. You probably dreamt it. Grandpa Elijah slammed his hand on the table. The plates rattled. I am not dreaming, he roared. I know what I signed. I signed the transfer authorization, $500,000 to Maya Dubois. Lorraine rushed to his side. She grabbed his arm, trying to pull him up from the chair. Okay, that is enough excitement for one day. You are agitated, your blood pressure is up. I am going to take you to your room. Nurse Brenda left your sedative on the nightstand. Come on, Dad. Up you go. She was trying to silence him. She was trying to gaslight him in front of everyone, just like she had been doing for months. But this time the numbers didn't add up. $100 versus $500,000. That wasn't a memory slip. That was theft. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Sit down, Mother, I said. Lorraine froze. She looked at me over her shoulder. Her eyes were venomous. Do not speak to me like that, Maya. I am handling my father. He is sick. He is not sick, I said, my voice steady and cold. I walked around the table. I saw the fear in Tyrell's eyes. I saw the guilt written all over Becca's face. I walked right up to my mother and placed my hand over hers, forcing her to let go of Grandpa's arm. He is not sick, I repeated. And he is not confused. I looked down at Grandpa. Grandpa? Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure you signed that paper? I am sure, he said, looking at me with intense clarity. It was for you. For your house. I wanted you to have a home that no one could take away from you. I turned to my mother. She was trembling. The red wine stain on her dress looked like a gunshot wound. "Where is my money, Mother?" I asked. She tried to slap me. She raised her hand, her face twisted in a snarl. "You ungrateful little brat! How dare you accuse me?" I caught her wrist in midair. I didn't squeeze. I just held it there. I wasn't the scared little girl anymore. I was a woman who had just realized that her own flesh and blood had robbed her of a fortune. "I am not accusing you," I said softly. "I am asking you. Grandpa says 500,000. I got 100. That leaves $499,900 unaccounted for." Tyrell stood up, trying to look tough. "You are crazy, Maya. Get out. You are ruining Thanksgiving." I let go of my mother's wrist. I looked at Tyrell. I looked at his new suit. I looked at Becca's diamond earrings. Suddenly, the math started to make sense. "I am not going anywhere," I said. "Not until I find out exactly where that wire transfer went. And if I find out it went anywhere other than my account, this dinner is going to be the last meal you all eat as free people." Lorraine screamed for the nurse. Tyrell started shouting insults, but Grandpa Elijah just sat there looking at me with a spark of pride I had never seen before. He knew. And now I knew. The war for the $500,000 had just begun. The silence in the dining room was shattered by my mother's laughter. It was not a happy sound. It was a sharp, brittle noise that sounded like dry twigs snapping under a boot. Lorraine leaned back in her chair, dabbing at the wine stain on her dress with a linen napkin, her face composing itself into a mask of pitying condescension. She looked at me not with anger, but with the weary expression of a parent dealing with a toddler having a tantrum. "Maya, honestly," she sighed, shaking her head. "Listen to yourself. You sound hysterical. Do you really believe that? Do you really think your grandfather, a man who cannot even remember to take his blood pressure medication without Nurse Brenda reminding him, managed to wire $500,000? She turned to the rest of the table, looking for allies. "He has been confused for months," she continued, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Just yesterday he thought Tyrell was his brother from 40 years ago. It is dementia, Maya. It is ugly and it is sad, but we do not exploit it. We do not make up fantasies about secret fortunes just because we are jealous of our siblings." Tyrell snorted, emboldened by my mother's defense. He wiped his mouth, his earlier panic replaced by his usual arrogance. "Exactly. You are tripping, sis. 500,000 for what? To buy what you drive, a 4-year-old Honda. You wear hoodies to family events. Why would Grandpa give you that kind of cash? He knows you wouldn't know what to do with it. You probably think he gave it to you because you are broke and desperate. It is called a delusion of grandeur. Look it up." I clenched my fists at my sides. My fingernails dug into my palms. They were doing it again. The dynamic was so familiar it was nauseating, gaslighting, spinning the narrative until up was down and black was white. They were making me the crazy one, the greedy one, while they sat there in clothes bought with stolen money. Grandpa Elijah tried to stand up. His face was red, his veins bulging in his neck. "I am not confused," he shouted, his voice shaking with rage. "I built this family. I know what money I have. Lorraine, you tell her. You tell her about the transfer." Lorraine's eyes hardened. She snapped her fingers at the nurse standing in the corner. "Nurse Brenda," she said sharply. "He is having an episode. He is agitated. It is bad for his heart." Brenda, a woman my mother had hired specifically because she asked no questions and followed orders blindly, moved in instantly. She pulled a syringe from her pocket. No, Grandpa protested, trying to push her away. "I don't need that. I need my lawyer." "Dad, stop fighting," Lorraine said, her voice turning cold steel. "We are doing this for your own good. You are seeing things that aren't there." I watched in horror as Brenda successfully administered the sedative into Grandpa's arm. Within seconds, his fight drained away. His eyes grew heavy. He slumped back into his chair, mumbling my name, mumbling about the money, until his words turned into unintelligible slurs. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to scream. But I looked at Lorraine, who was now calmly sipping water, and Tyrell, who was smirking at me. If I fought them now, physically or verbally, I would lose. They held the power here. They held the medical proxy. They held the narrative. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the data architect they all mocked. I took a deep breath and forced my face to go blank. I picked up my purse from the floor. Fine, I said, my voice flat. Maybe you are right. Maybe I am just tired. Lorraine smiled, a victorious curling of her red lips. Of course you are, honey. Go home, get some sleep. We will forget you made this scene. We are family after all. I turned to leave. As I walked past Tyrell, who was sitting with his phone on the table next to his plate, the screen lit up with a notification. It was a banking alert. The brightness of the screen caught my eye. I paused for a fraction of a second, pretending to adjust my purse strap. My eyes locked onto the notification banner. It was from First National Bank. The preview text was short, but it was enough. Transaction complete. Wire received $500,000. Balance updated. I felt a surge of adrenaline so strong it almost made me dizzy. I didn't stop. I didn't gasp. I pulled my phone from my pocket in one smooth motion, as if checking the time, and held it at my hip, angling the camera lens down. I pressed the volume button to snap a burst of photos without looking. Get home safe, Sis, Tyrell called out, mocking me. Don't spend that $100 all in one place. I walked out the front door without looking back. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, muting the sounds of their laughter. I walked straight to my car, parked at the end of the long driveway, far away from the Bentleys and Porsches. I got in and locked the doors. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the thrill of the hunt. I threw my purse into the passenger seat and pulled out my laptop. I always traveled with it. My family thought I was just a nerd who couldn't disconnect, but today that laptop was my weapon. I connected to the hotspot on my phone. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark interior of the car. 3 years ago, when Grandpa was still handling his own affairs, he had asked me to set up the cybersecurity for the family accounts. He trusted me. He didn't trust technology. I had set up firewalls, two-factor authentication, and encrypted backups. Lorraine had demanded the passwords when she took over power of attorney 6 months ago. I had given them to her. But what Lorraine didn't know, what Tyrell was too stupid to understand, was that in the world of data architecture, the architect always keeps a master key. I had created a mirror admin access for myself, hidden deep in the code, just in case of an emergency. This was an emergency. I typed in the backdoor command. The screen flooded with code, then resolved into the dashboard of the Dubois Family Trust. I navigated to the transfer logs. My fingers flew across the keyboard. There it was. Dated last Monday. A wire transfer initiated from Grandpa's primary holding account. Amount $500,000. But the destination wasn't my savings account. I clicked on the transaction ID to expand the details. The routing number led to a business account opened just 3 weeks ago. I traced the business EIN number through the state registry database, which I accessed through a public record scraper I had built for work. The owner of the account popped up on the screen, Tyrell Future LLC. I sat back in my seat, the leather cold against my back. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a delusion. My mother had taken the money Grandpa meant for my future, intercepted the wire, and funneled it directly into a shell company for her golden child son. Tyrell Future LLC. The name was so arrogant, so sloppy. I pulled up the recent transactions for Tyrell Future LLC. Debit $250,000. Vendor City Center Realty. Memo Penthouse down payment. Debit $180,000. Vendor Atlanta Exotic Motors. Memo McLaren 720S. I looked at the timestamps. The car was bought yesterday. The penthouse closed this morning. They were eating turkey and drinking wine while spending my life savings. They had sedated an 82-year-old man to keep him quiet. They had looked me in the eye and called me crazy. I closed the laptop slowly. A cold calm settled over me. It was the kind of calm that comes before a storm. They thought they had won because they silenced Grandpa. They thought they had won because I walked away. But they forgot one thing. They didn't just steal money, they left a digital trail, and I was the only one in the family who knew how to read the map. I started the engine. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going to war. And the first battle was going to be at Tyrell's new penthouse. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in the dark parking lot, casting long, sharp shadows across the interior of my sedan. My fingers hovered over the trackpad as I stared at the digital autopsy of my brother's business. Tyrell, Future, LLC. He had spent the last 3 years telling anyone who would listen that he was building the next Google, that he was a visionary in the crypto space. He wore turtlenecks like Steve Jobs and quoted Elon Musk at breakfast. But as I drilled down into the corporate filings I had pulled from the state registry, the truth was staring me in the face. It was pathetic, and it was criminal. There were no employees, there was no payroll, there were no patents pending, there was no product, no software, and no revenue stream. Tyrell Future LLC was a ghost. It was a shell company registered to a UPS mailbox in a strip mall 3 towns over. Its only function was to act as a laundry machine, a vessel to catch the money my mother had stolen from my grandfather and wash it clean so Tyrell could spend it without raising red flags. I clicked on the asset column. The company had acquired 2 major assets in the last 48 hours. The first was a $250,000 down payment on a penthouse at the Aurelia, the most pretentious residential skyscraper in downtown Atlanta. The second was a wire transfer of $180,000 to a luxury dealership for a McLaren 720S. I felt a wave of nausea. My grandfather had spent 50 years sweating on construction sites, saving every dime, wearing the same boots until the soles wore through, just so he could leave a legacy. He wanted that money to buy me a safe home, a foundation for my life. And in less than 2 days, my mother and brother had liquidated his blood, sweat, and tears into a flashy car and an apartment they couldn't afford to maintain. I opened a new tab and typed in the one search term I knew would give me the visual confirmation I needed. Becca Dubois, Instagram. My sister-in-law's profile loaded instantly. Her feed was a curated museum of narcissism. And there at the very top was a story posted 20 minutes ago. I clicked it. The video opened with a filter that made the air sparkle. Becca was holding a bottle of champagne spinning around in an empty room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. She squealed into the camera, her voice high-pitched and grating. "We finally got the keys, you guys. Look at this view. Hard work pays off. Tyrell has been grinding so hard for this. We are officially homeowners. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag self-made. Hashtag power couple. Self-made. The hashtag burned into my retinas. There was nothing self-made about them. They were thieves-made. They were parasites-made." I slammed my laptop shut. I didn't need to see any more data. I needed to see them. I needed them to know that the ghost in the machine was coming for them. I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of the driveway of the Dubois mansion. I drove toward the city, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The drive took 30 minutes. 30 minutes of replaying my mother's gaslighting in my head. 30 minutes of remembering Grandpa's confused, hurt eyes as they sedated him. I pulled up to the Aurelia. It was a tower of glass and steel that screamed new money. The valet stand was lined with Ferraris and Lamborghinis. I pulled my 4-year-old Honda Accord right up to the front, ignoring the scowl of the valet attendant. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, looking at my car with disdain. "Deliveries are in the back." I stepped out, smoothing my navy dress. "I am not a delivery driver," I said, tossing him my keys. "I am family. Keep it close. I won't be long." I walked into the lobby. It smelled of expensive lilies and arrogance. I knew I couldn't just walk up to the elevator. This building had security tight enough to rival the Pentagon. I walked over to the digital directory. I found the listing. Tyrell Future LLC, Penthouse B. Just as I was trying to figure out how to bypass the concierge, a group of movers walked in, carrying a massive velvet sectional sofa. They were struggling with the weight. One of them shouted for someone to hold the elevator. I didn't hesitate. I walked briskly past the concierge desk, holding my phone to my ear, as if I were in the middle of a high-stakes business call. I slipped into the freight elevator right behind the movers. I pressed the button for the penthouse level. The movers didn't look at me. They were too busy trying not to drop the sofa. The elevator ride was silent, but my mind was loud. I was rehearsing what I would say. I was calculating the legal ramifications. But mostly I was trying to keep my rage from boiling over into violence. I wasn't going to hit them. I was going to hurt them in a way that lasted longer than a bruise. The doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. The door to the unit was propped open with a heavy marble doorstop to let the movers in and out. I stepped inside. The apartment was massive. White marble floors, white walls, modern art that looked like paint splatters. It was cold and sterile. It was exactly the kind of place Tyrell would think was classy because he saw it in a rap video. I heard Becca's voice coming from the living room. "So many of you are asking how we did it," she was saying. "Honestly, it is all about mindset. You have to manifest your success. Tyrell just manifested this deal and the universe provided." I walked around the corner. Becca was standing in the center of the living room. She had a ring light set up on a tripod. She was live streaming to her 5,000 followers. She was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal. She didn't see me at first. She was too busy reading comments on her phone screen. "Aw, thank you, Sarah. Yes, the view is to die for. We are going to have a housewarming party soon. Invite only, obviously." I stepped into the frame. Becca saw me on her phone screen before she saw me in real life. Her eyes went wide. She spun around, nearly knocking over her ring light. "Maya!" she gasped. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" She looked at the phone, realizing she was still live. She tried to laugh it off, flashing a fake smile at her audience. "Oh my God, you guys, look who it is. My sister-in-law came to congratulate us. She is so sweet." She turned to me, her eyes pleading with me to play along. "Right, Maya. You came to see the new place. Isn't it amazing Tyrell really outdid himself?" I looked at the phone. I saw the viewer count. 300 people were watching. I looked at Becca. She looked terrified. She knew that I knew. "It is certainly something, Becca." I said, my voice calm and loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "The marble is beautiful, and the view is expensive." Becca giggled nervously. "Right, we are so blessed." I took a step closer to her. I didn't smile. "It is amazing what you can buy when you have a direct line to a wire transfer meant for someone else," I said. Becca's smile faltered. "What? What are you talking about, Maya? Don't be weird." I looked directly into the camera lens of her phone. "I am talking about the $500,000 my mother stole from my grandfather last week," I said clearly. "The money she wired to Tyrell Future LLC, the money you used to put the down payment on this apartment this morning." Becca lunged for the phone. "Stop it. You are jealous. Cut the feed." I blocked her hand. I wasn't touching her, but my presence was enough to make her flinch back. "You posted a hashtag, Becca," I said. "Self-made." "That is funny. Because according to the bank records I just pulled, this apartment was made by my grandfather's life savings. It was made by fraud." The comments on the screen were flying by now. People were asking what was happening. People were using the shock face emoji. "Get out!" Becca screamed, her facade cracking completely. "This is my house. You are trespassing, Tyrell. Tyrell, get her out of here." Tyrell wasn't there. He was probably out driving the McLaren he couldn't afford to insure. I looked around the empty, echoing room. "It is a beautiful house, Becca," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "It really is. It is just a shame that you are standing on top of my stolen money. And just so you know, I am the landlord now, and I am serving you an eviction notice." I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Becca scrambling to end the live stream, sobbing as she realized that 300 people had just watched the first brick of her fake empire crumble to dust. I walked back to the elevator. I pressed the button. I didn't feel satisfied yet. This was just the warning shot. The real war was about to begin, and I had the data to win it. The library of the Dubois mansion was a room designed to intimidate. It was lined with dark walnut bookshelves that reached the ceiling, filled with leather-bound books that nobody in my family ever read. A fire was crackling in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the Persian rug. My mother Lorraine was sitting in her favorite wingback chair, holding a fresh glass of red wine. She looked like a queen waiting to sentence a peasant. I walked in and closed the heavy double doors behind me. The click of the latch echoed in the silence. I did not sit down. I stood in the center of the room, still wearing my navy dress from dinner, though it felt like a lifetime had passed since I last stood in this house. "You called me," I said, my voice flat. "You said it was urgent. You said Grandpa was asking for me." Lorraine took a slow sip of her wine. She didn't look at me immediately. She stared into the fire, her profile sharp and severe. "He is asleep," she said calmly. The sedative finally kicked in. "He was very upset, Maya. You really agitated him with your little outburst at dinner." I felt a flash of anger. "I agitated him. You gaslit him. You told him his mind was gone because you didn't want him to remember that he gave me $500,000. Lorraine finally turned to look at me. Her expression wasn't guilty. It was annoyed. It was the look she used to give me when I brought home a B on a report card. "Stop being so dramatic, Maya," she sighed, setting her glass down on the side table. "We need to have a grown-up conversation. I am glad you went to see Tyrell's new apartment. It is impressive, isn't it?" I stared at her in disbelief. She wasn't denying it. The pretense was gone. "You admit it," I said. "You admit you took the money." Lorraine waved her hand dismissively. "Took is such an ugly word. I reallocated it. I made an executive decision as the head of this family." She stood up and walked toward me, the silk of her robe swishing softly. "Look at you, Maya. You are 30 years old. You have a senior title at a tech firm. You make 6 figures. You have a 401k. You have health insurance. You are safe. You are stable. You have always been the capable one." She paused, tilting her head. "But Tyrell. My poor Tyrell needs help. He has big dreams, Maya, but the world is hard on young black men. He needs a leg up. He needs a foundation." When that money came in from the sale of the lot, I looked at the situation logically. You want to buy a house? You can get a mortgage. You have the credit score for it. But Tyrell needed liquid capital. He needed a launch pad. I felt my jaw tighten. "So you decided to be Robin Hood. You stole from the rich sister to give to the poor brother. Except I am not rich, mother. I work hard. And Tyrell isn't poor. He is lazy." Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "He is not lazy. He is a visionary. He just needed the right resources to be taken seriously. In his world, image is everything. You can't close deals driving a Toyota. You can't host investors in a rental. He needed that penthouse. He needed that car. It is an investment in his brand." I laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound. An investment, mother. He bought a McLaren. He didn't buy stocks. He didn't buy inventory. He bought a toy. He bought a car that costs more than your annual alimony payments. You took my $500,000 money Grandpa specifically wanted me to have for security, and you let Tyrell blow it on leather seats and a view of the skyline. That isn't business. That is insanity." Lorraine stepped closer, invading my personal space. Her perfume, usually floral and sweet, smelled cloying and suffocating. "It is called sacrifice, Maya," she snapped, her voice rising. "That is what family does. We help the ones who are struggling. Since you are so selfish that you wouldn't offer to help your brother, I had to do it for you. Becca and Tyrell are just starting out. They deserve a chance to shine. As the big sister, you should be proud that you could provide that for them." I looked at this woman, this stranger who shared my DNA. She truly believed it. She had twisted the narrative so completely in her head that she was the hero of this story. She genuinely believed that I existed solely to be a resource for her golden child. I am not proud, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. I am disgusted. You forged a wire transfer. That is a federal crime. You exploited a vulnerable elderly man. That is elder abuse. And you stole from your daughter. That is just pathetic. I took a step back. I want my money back, Lorraine. All of it. Tell Tyrell to sell the car. Tell him to back out of the condo deal. I don't care how you do it. Put the money back in my account by Monday, or I go to the police. The air in the room changed instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lorraine's face went rigid. The mask of the concerned matriarch fell away, revealing the tyrant underneath. She moved faster than I expected. Her hand lashed out and connected hard with my cheek. The sound of the slap was loud in the quiet room. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned. I stood there stunned, tasting the copper tang of blood where my tooth had cut my lip. You do not speak to me like that, Lorraine screamed, her eyes wide and manic. I am your mother. I brought you into this world. I am the power of attorney for this estate. I decide where the money goes, not you, not your senile grandfather. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She pointed a shaking finger at my face. You think you are so smart with your computers and your data, she hissed. But you know nothing about power. If you go to the police, if you try to embarrass this family, I will ruin you. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that was far more terrifying than her scream. I hold the pen, Maya. I control the will. If you make a scene, I will cut you out completely. You won't get a dime when I die. You won't get a dime when your grandfather dies. And more than that, I will destroy your reputation. I will tell the entire family, every aunt, every cousin, the pastor at the church, that you are the one abusing Elijah. I stared at her, touching my throbbing cheek. You wouldn't? Oh, I would. She smiled, and it was a smile devoid of any humanity. I will tell them you are trying to declare him incompetent to steal his money. I will tell them you are the reason his health is failing. I will say that you stressed him out so much he had a stroke. Who are they going to believe, Maya? The grieving daughter who takes care of him every day, or the cold, distant granddaughter who only shows up when she smells cash? I looked at her. I really looked at her. For 30 years, I had tried to please this woman. I had tried to be perfect, quiet and successful, hoping that one day she would look at me the way she looked at Tyrell. But in that moment, with my cheek burning and her threats hanging in the air, the hope finally died. There was no mother here. There was only a monster protecting her ego. I slowly lowered my hand from my face. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went into safe mode. I became the architect assessing a catastrophic structural failure. You are right, Mother, I said softly. You hold the pen. You control the narrative. Lorraine straightened up, smoothing her robe, thinking she had won, thinking I had capitulated. Good, she said, picking up her wineglass again. I am glad we understand each other. Now go home. We have a housewarming party to plan for Tyrell, and I expect you to be there. Smiling. I turned and walked to the door. I placed my hand on the brass handle. I looked back at her one last time. She was already back in her chair, staring at the fire, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than a servant she had disciplined. I walked out of the library. I walked out of the house. The night air was cold on my face. I touched my cheek again. She thought the threat of disinheritance would stop me. She thought the fear of gossip would silence me. She didn't realize that she had just given me the final variable I needed to solve the equation. She had admitted to the crime. She had admitted to the motive, and she had underestimated her opponent. I got into my car and locked the doors. I didn't go home. I pulled out my phone. I had one contact left in this family, one person who might still be on the side of truth. It was a long shot, but after tonight, it was the only shot I had. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times. "Hello," a gruff voice answered. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steady. "This is Maya Dubois. We need to talk about my grandfather. And we need to talk about wire fraud. My mother was efficient. I had to give her that." By the time the sun rose on Friday morning, she had already launched a full-scale public relations campaign against her own daughter. I woke up not to the sound of birds, but to the relentless vibration of my phone on the nightstand. It was buzzing so constantly, it was moving across the wood surface like a living thing. I picked it up, squinting against the harsh light of the screen. I had 47 unread text messages and 12 missed calls. They were not from work, they were from family. From the extended network of aunts, uncles, cousins, and church deacons that made up the Dubois social circle. I opened a message from Auntie Sarah, a woman who had knitted me a blanket when I went off to college. It read, "I am praying for your soul, Maya. To attack your mother and try to declare your grandfather incompetent just to get your hands on his money is a sin. Repent before it is too late." I felt a physical blow to my chest. Incompetent, is that what she told them? I opened another from my cousin Marcus. He wrote, "I always knew you were jealous of Tyrell, but this is low. Leave Grandpa alone. He is sick. He doesn't need your drama." Lorraine had spun the narrative faster than I could have imagined. She hadn't just denied stealing the money. She had gone on the offensive. She told everyone that I was the one trying to manipulate a senile old man. She told them I was angry because Tyrell was successful and I was bitter. She painted me as a vulture circling a dying prey. I sat up in bed, feeling the walls of my apartment closing in. Isolation is a powerful weapon. It makes you question your own reality. For a second, I wondered if I was the crazy one. Maybe I should just let it go. Maybe fighting for the truth wasn't worth losing everyone I had ever known. Then I saw the notification from Instagram. Tyrell had tagged me in a video. I tapped the screen. The video opened. Tyrell was sitting in the driver's seat of his new McLaren. The leather seats were visible in the background. He was wearing sunglasses even though he was indoors. He took them off slowly, looking into the camera with eyes that looked red and puffy. He was acting. It was a terrible performance, but to anyone who didn't know him, it looked like heartbreak. "Hey everyone," he said, his voice cracking. "I just wanted to come on here and keep it real. Success is lonely. When you start leveling up, people change. Even family. My sister..." He paused, wiping a non-existent tear. "My sister is going through some things. She is hurting. And hurt people hurt people. She is trying to tear down everything I built because she can't handle seeing me win. Please just pray for her. And pray for our grandfather. She is stressing him out so much with her lies about money. We just want peace." The caption read, "The road to the top is filled with snakes. Stay focused. Hashtag family drama. Hashtag haters. Hashtag self-made." I threw my phone across the room. It hit the pile of laundry in the corner with a soft thud. The audacity was breathtaking. He was sitting in a car bought with my money, asking people to pray for me while calling me a snake. I needed to talk to Grandpa. He was the only one who knew the truth. I got dressed in 5 minutes, throwing on jeans and a sweater. I didn't care how I looked. I drove to the mansion, ignoring the speed limit. When I arrived, the iron gates were closed. Usually they were left open during the day. I punched in the code on the keypad. Access denied. I punched it in again. Access denied. Lorraine had changed the code. I parked the car and walked to the intercom. I pressed the button. "Hello?" It was Nurse Brenda's voice. "Brenda, let me in. I need to see my grandfather." There was a pause. "I am sorry, Ms. Dubois. Your mother has given strict instructions. No visitors, especially not you. She says you are a trigger for Mr. Elijah's agitation." "Brenda, listen to me," I shouted into the speaker. "He is being isolated. That is illegal. Let me speak to him." "He is resting, Maya. Please leave or I will have to call the police for trespassing. The line clicked dead. I stood there gripping the cold metal bars of the gate. I could see the house in the distance. I could see the window of Grandpa's room on the second floor. The curtains were drawn tight. Was he in there? Was he awake? Was he wondering why I hadn't come for him? I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. I got back in my car and drove home. The drive back was a blur of tears and rage. By the time I got back to my apartment, I was exhausted. My soul felt heavy. I sat on my sofa staring at the blank television screen. Maybe Lorraine was right. She held all the cards. She had the house, the money, the family support, and the gate codes. I was just one person with a laptop and a lot of evidence that nobody wanted to see. I was tired of fighting. I reached for my phone to text my mother. I was going to tell her she won. I was going to tell her I would sign whatever she wanted if she just let me see Grandpa one last time. But before I could type the first letter, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I thought it was another cousin calling to scream at me. But something made me swipe right. "Hello," I whispered. "Is this Maya Dubois?" The voice was deep, gravelly, and familiar. It sounded like old leather and cigar smoke. "Yes." "Who is this?" "This is Arthur Henderson," the voice said. I sat up straight. Arthur Henderson was Grandpa's oldest friend and his personal attorney for 40 years. Lorraine hated him. She had tried to fire him last month, but Grandpa had refused to sign the papers. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice trembling. "I am so glad you called. They won't let me see him. Lorraine has changed the locks. They are saying he is senile." "I know," Henderson said. His voice was calm, unhurried. "I tried to visit him this morning. Brenda wouldn't let me in either." "Then it is over," I said, feeling the hope drain out of me. "If even his lawyer can't see him, we can't prove anything." Henderson let out a low chuckle. It was a dry, raspy sound. "You underestimate Elijah, kid. You think because he walks slow and shakes a little that his mind is soft. That man was negotiating contracts with the mob in the 70s while your mother was still in diapers." "What do you mean?" I asked. Henderson lowered his voice. "Brenda is not the only person in that house. The housekeeper, Maria. She has been with your grandfather for 20 years. She is loyal to him, not your mother. She slipped me a note an hour ago at the grocery store." My heart started to pound. "A note from Elijah," Henderson said. "He wants you to know something. He isn't taking the pills." I froze. "What?" "But I saw Brenda inject him." Henderson continued. "He plays along. He acts confused. He lets them think he is out of it. But when they give him the oral medication, he spits it out in his napkin. And the injection Brenda gave him at dinner, he told me he paid Maria to switch the vials in Brenda's bag 2 days ago. It was saline solution. Just salt water." I gasped. "He was faking it." "He is sharp as a tack," Maya Henderson said. "He is watching them. He is letting them dig their own graves. He is gathering evidence from the inside while you gather it from the outside." I felt a rush of relief so strong it made me dizzy. The old lion wasn't dying. He was hunting. Henderson's voice turned serious. "But he can't keep this up forever. Lorraine is planning to move him to a facility next week to get full control of the estate. We have a window, Maya. A small one. He told me to tell you that he is ready. He is just waiting for your signal." "My signal?" I asked. "He said you would know what to do," Henderson said. "He said you are a Dubois. We don't get mad. We get even. Do you have the evidence of the wire fraud?" I looked at my laptop sitting on the coffee table. "Yes," I said. "I have everything." "Good," Henderson said. "Then wipe your tears, girl. We aren't victims here. We are the prosecution. Meet me at my office tomorrow morning. We are going to prepare a surprise party." I hung up the phone. The silence in my apartment didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt electric. I looked at the picture of Tyrell on my screen, still smirking in his stolen car. "Enjoy the ride, brother," I whispered, "because the road is about to run out." The office of Arthur Henderson was a relic from a different era. It smelled of mahogany old leather and the kind of expensive cigar smoke that clings to the walls like a memory. Located in a brick building downtown, it felt a world away from the sterile glass tower where Tyrell lived or the manicured perfection of the Dubois mansion. This was a place where real business happened, the kind of business that didn't require hashtags or ring lights. I sat across from Mr. Henderson. He looked exactly as I remembered him from childhood barbecues, a bulldog of a man with silver hair and eyes that had seen every lie a human being could tell. He didn't offer me tea or sympathy. He simply slid a thick manila folder across the heavy wooden desk. The sound of the paper sliding against the wood was the only noise in the room. "Open it," he grunted. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of banking documents, but they were not the digital screenshots I had hacked from the system. These were the official notarized instruction forms from the bank. The paper felt heavy in my hands. "Look at page 3, Henderson said, leaning back in his creaking leather chair. Section 4, Special Instructions." I flipped to page 3. My eyes scanned the dense legal text until I found the section he was pointing to. There, in my grandfather's shaky but undeniable handwriting, was a paragraph that changed everything. It read, "The funds in the amount of $500,000 are a conditional gift to my granddaughter Maya Dubois. These funds are restricted solely for the purchase of primary residential real estate titled exclusively in the name of Maya Dubois. Any other use of these funds renders the transfer void and constitutes a revocation of administrative privileges." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. He knew, I whispered, looking up at Henderson. He knew she would try to take it. Henderson nodded slowly. "Elijah is not a fool, Maya. He knew Lorraine has been bleeding his accounts dry for years, but he let it slide because he wanted to keep the peace. But this money, this was different. This was your future." He anticipated that Lorraine might try to intercept it, so he attached a legal tripwire to the cash. "It is called a restricted gift deed." I looked back at the document. The implications were staggering. It wasn't just that Lorraine stole the money, it was that she violated a specific written legal condition. Henderson leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "Let me explain what this means in criminal terms, Maya. When your mother moved that money into her account and then sent it to Tyrell, she didn't just steal. She committed wire fraud. That is a federal crime because the money moved across banking institutions. And because she was acting as the power of attorney, she committed fiduciary embezzlement. She used her legal authority to benefit herself and her son at the expense of the principal, your grandfather." He pointed a thick finger at the paper. "And because she ignored the restriction that the money must be used for a house in your name, the moment Tyrell used it to buy a penthouse in his name, the transaction became illegal. The money is legally considered stolen property." "What about Tyrell?" I asked. "Does he know ignorance is not a defense when you are spending $500,000 that fell out of the sky?" Henderson said dryly. "But here is the kicker. Becca posted that video. I saw it. She flaunted the asset. By accepting the money and using it to purchase luxury goods, Tyrell and his wife are guilty of receipt of stolen property and money laundering. They took illicit funds and tried to convert them into legitimate assets like the car and the condo." I sat back, my mind racing. I had them. I had them all. It wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a RICO case waiting to happen. I had the digital trail, and Henderson had the legal intent. "So what do we do?" I asked. "Do we call the police right now? Do we send the cops to the mansion?" Henderson picked up his phone. "I can have a warrant sworn out by noon. I can have the sheriff at your mother's door before lunch. We can freeze Tyrell's accounts before he finishes his morning coffee. It is your call, kid. You are the victim here." I looked at the phone in his hand. I thought about Lorraine screaming at me in the library. I thought about Tyrell smirking at me at the dinner table. I thought about Becca calling security on me. If I called the police now, it would be over quickly. They would be arrested quietly. Lorraine would spin it. She would cry to her friends that it was a misunderstanding. She would use her connections to keep it out of the papers. Tyrell would play the victim. They would suffer, yes, but they would survive. They would keep their social standing. I didn't want them to survive. I wanted to burn the infection out of my family completely. I wanted the world to see them for what they were. Put the phone down, I said. Henderson raised an eyebrow. You want to let them get away with it? No, I said, my voice cold and steady. I want to let them hang themselves. I stood up and walked to the window looking out at the busy street below. Lorraine told me there is a housewarming party this weekend. A big gala at Tyrell's new penthouse. She invited the press. She invited the investors. She invited the entire social register of Atlanta. She wants to show off her successful son. Henderson chuckled. It was a dark, dangerous sound. She is throwing a party in a crime scene. Exactly, I turned back to him. If we arrest them now, nobody sees the truth. But if we wait until they are standing on that stage bragging about their wealth surrounded by the people whose validation they crave more than oxygen, then we don't just take their freedom, we take their reputation, we take their mask. Henderson smiled. He opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh cigar. You really are a Dubois, he said approvingly. You have your grandfather's killer instinct. I walked back to the desk and tapped the folder. Keep the originals safe. Scan everything. I need digital copies. I am going to prepare a presentation for the party. You are going to the party? Henderson asked. Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world, I said. Lorraine made me promise to be there. She wants me to be the supportive sister. She wants me to smile and clap while Tyrell takes credit for my money. So I am going to give her exactly what she wants. I will be there. Henderson nodded. And Elijah? Keep him safe, I said. Keep the saline switch going. Tell him to hold on for 3 more days. On Saturday night, when the fireworks start, I want him to walk through that door and deliver the final blow. I picked up my purse. I felt lighter than I had in years. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. I walked out of Henderson's office and into the bright sunlight. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Lorraine. Reminder. The party starts at 7 p.m. on Saturday. Wear something expensive. Don't embarrass us. I typed back a single word. Understood. I got into my car and looked at the message again. Don't embarrass us. It was almost funny. She was worried about me wearing the wrong shoes or saying the wrong thing. She had no idea that I was bringing something much louder than a fashion faux pas. I was bringing the truth. And in a family built on lies, the truth was the most embarrassing thing of all. I drove home plotting every slide, every graphic, every second of the presentation I would unleash. They wanted a show. They wanted a spectacle. On Saturday night, in front of everyone they tried to impress, I was going to give them the performance of a lifetime. And when the curtain fell, there would be no applause, only handcuffs. The elevator ride to the 45th floor of the Aurelia took exactly 30 seconds. In that half-minute, I checked my reflection in the mirrored doors. For the first time in my life, I didn't look like the sensible, quiet Dubois daughter. I had traded my navy blue and gray wardrobe for a dress the color of fresh blood. It was crimson silk, tailored to perfection, sharp enough to cut and bright enough to burn. My mother had told me to come and keep up appearances. She told me to look the part of the supportive sister. So I decided to dress like a warning flare. When the elevator doors slid open, the noise hit me first. It was a wall of sound composed of clinking crystal jazz music and the high-pitched hollow laughter of Atlanta's social elite. The penthouse was packed. Tyrell and Becca had invited everyone. There were local politicians, tech investors, Instagram influencers, and a small army of photographers from the city's lifestyle magazines. They were all there to celebrate the rise of Tyrell Dubois, unaware that they were standing inside a crime scene. I stepped into the foyer. The air smelled of expensive lilies and arrogance. My heels clicked on the white marble floor, a sound that was distinct even over the music. Heads turned. I saw people whisper. They were used to seeing Maya, the shadow Maya, the background character. They weren't used to seeing Maya, the woman who looked like she was about to burn the building down. My mother Lorraine spotted me instantly. She was standing near the coat check, holding a glass of champagne, her eyes scanning the room like a security camera. When she saw me, her expression flickered from annoyance to relief, and then to suspicion. She smoothed her sequined gown and marched over to me, grabbing my arm with a grip that was painful. "You are late," she hissed through a frozen smile, leaning in close so the nearby guests wouldn't hear. "And what are you wearing? You stand out too much. I told you to blend in." I pulled my arm away gently but firmly. "You told me to look expensive." "Mother, this is expensive." Lorraine glared at me, her eyes narrowing. "Just remember the deal, Maya. You smile. You congratulate your brother. You tell everyone how proud you are. If I see you looking sour, or if you say one word about Grandpa, or the money, I will have security escort you out before you can finish your drink. Do you understand? The press is here. Do not embarrass us." I looked over her shoulder at the photographer snapping pictures of Tyrell near the balcony. I understood perfectly. She wanted a perfect family tableau. She wanted to use my presence to validate Tyrell's lie. If the sensible, smart sister was here, then everything must be legitimate. "I understand," I said calmly. "I am just here to watch the show." "Good," Lorraine said, patting my cheek with a cold hand. "Go mingle. Becca is over by the bar. Be nice to her." I walked into the main living room. It was a masterclass in wasted money. The furniture was all white velvet, impractical and pretentious. The art on the walls was generic and overpriced. Waiters circulated with trays of caviar and truffle oil hors d'oeuvres. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and moved through the crowd listening. The conversations were nauseating. I heard Tyrell telling a group of men in suits about his investment strategy. "It is all about leverage," Tyrell was saying, puffing out his chest. "You have to know when to move capital. I saw the opportunity in this market, and I took it. My grandfather taught me everything I know." I tightened my grip on my glass. He was using Grandpa's name to sell his fraud. The audacity was breathtaking. Grandpa, who was currently sitting in a dark room faking dementia just to survive, was being used as a prop for Tyrell's ego. I continued my tour of the stolen property. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of Atlanta was spectacular. The city lights glittered below like diamonds. I thought about the $500,000. This view cost exactly $180,000 of those dollars. I looked at the grand piano in the corner that nobody knew how to play. That was another $20,000. Every inch of this space was paved with my stolen future. A flash of light blinded me for a second. I blinked and saw a photographer lowering his camera. "Beautiful dress, Ms. Dubois," he said. "Can we get a quote about your brother's success? You must be very proud." I looked at the lens. I smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "Proud is certainly one word for it," I said. "Tyrell has always been surprising. Tonight is going to be a night nobody forgets." The photographer nodded, satisfied with the soundbite, and moved on. I turned around and found myself face to face with Becca. My sister-in-law was holding court near the wet bar. She was wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown, complete with a train that people kept stepping on. She was surrounded by her friends, a gaggle of women who all looked like carbon copies of each other. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with malice. She excused herself from her circle and glided over to me, her hips swaying. "Maya!" She squealed, her voice loud enough to attract attention. "I didn't think you would actually come." She leaned in for a fake air kiss near my cheek. She smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. She pulled back and looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my red dress with disdain. "Wow, that is a bold color choice," she said, her voice dripping with passive aggression. "Very attention-seeking. But I guess when you don't have much going on in your own life, you have to make a splash at other people's parties." I looked at her calmly. I wasn't going to take the bait. Not yet. It is a housewarming, Becca, I said. Red is for good luck. In some cultures, it wards off evil spirits. I thought you might need it. Becca laughed a tinkling, hollow sound. You are so funny, Maya, always the joker. She gestured around the room with her champagne flute encompassing the crowd, the view, and the luxury. But seriously, thank you for coming, she said, raising her voice slightly so her friends could hear. It means a lot to Tyrell and me that you came to visit our home. I know it must be hard for you. She paused for dramatic effect, tilting her head to the side. Hard, I asked. Why would it be hard? Becca smirked. You know, seeing all this, seeing what Tyrell has achieved. I know you are still renting that little apartment on the other side of town. It must be overwhelming to be in a place like this. But really, Maya, you should make yourself at home. Feel free to look around. Just try not to touch the silk drapes, okay? Oils from your hands and all that. She took a sip of her drink, her eyes gleaming with triumph. You just make yourself comfortable, she continued, leaning in closer. Even though I know your place is probably tiny compared to this, it is nice for you to see how the other half lives for a night. The insult was designed to humiliate me. She wanted to remind me of my place. She wanted to establish that she was the queen of the castle and I was the poor relation begging for scraps. I looked at her. I looked at the ring on her finger bought with my money. I looked at the roof over her head paid for with my inheritance. You are right, Becca, I said softly. My apartment is much smaller than this. But there is one big difference. Oh, and what is that? She asked, bored. I sleep very well at night, I said. Becca frowned, confused. Enjoy the party, Becca, I added, stepping past her. It is a beautiful apartment. You should enjoy every single minute of it, while it lasts. I walked away before she could respond. I checked my watch. It was 7:45. The speeches were scheduled for 8 o'clock. I saw Tyrell moving toward the small stage that had been set up near the balcony. He was adjusting his tie, looking nervous but excited. I moved toward the back of the room near the audio-visual booth, where a hired technician was managing the playlist and the slideshow of Tyrell's achievements that was looping on a massive LED screen. I slipped my hand into my purse and touched the cold metal of the flash drive Mr. Henderson had given me. Becca thought she had won. Lorraine thought she had silenced me. Tyrell thought he was a king. They had 15 minutes left. 15 minutes of fantasy before reality came crashing through the door. I took a deep breath and blended into the shadows of the red drapes, waiting for the signal to bring the house down. The house lights dimmed, signaling that the main event was about to begin. The murmuring crowd of Atlanta's elite quieted down, turning their attention toward the small stage set up in front of the sweeping floor-to-ceiling windows. A spotlight clicked on, cutting through the darkness and illuminating Tyrell. He stood there soaking in the attention like a lizard basking on a rock. He adjusted the lapels of his suit, a suit that cost more than my first car, and flashed a smile that was all teeth and ambition. He tapped the microphone twice. The sound thumped through the massive speakers, vibrating in the chests of everyone in the room. Testing, testing, Tyrell said, his voice smooth and practiced. Can everyone hear me in the back? A ripple of polite applause and affirmative murmurs went through the room. Becca, standing in this front row, clasped her hands together and gazed up at him with a look of adoration that I knew was at least 50% acting. Beside her, my mother Lorraine stood with her chin raised high, looking like the Queen Mother surveying her kingdom. She caught my eye across the room and gave a sharp nod, a silent command for me to smile and clap. I didn't smile. I stood in the shadows near the AV booth, my back pressed against the velvet drapes. The technician, a young guy with headphones around his neck, was too busy watching Tyrell to notice me standing just a few feet away from his console. I had my phone in my hand. The app I had coded specifically for this moment was open, searching for the Bluetooth pairing signal of the main projector system. Welcome to the future, Tyrell began, spreading his arms wide. Thank you all for coming to celebrate this milestone. You know, a lot of people ask me, Tyrell, how did you do it? How did you go from a dream to a penthouse in the sky in such a short time? He paused for effect, letting the question hang in the air. It wasn't easy. He continued, his voice dropping to a humble register. It took grit. It took the grind. It took waking up when everyone else was sleeping and working when everyone else was partying. They call it luck, but I call it leverage. I saw the trends in the market before the experts did. I moved capital when others were scared to invest. That is the Dubois way. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. The grind. The only thing Tyrell had ever ground was his grandfather's patience. He was talking about leverage and capital as if he were Warren Buffett, when in reality, his entire strategy was waiting for his mother to commit wire fraud. But I didn't do it alone, Tyrell said, turning his gaze toward Lorraine. I have to thank the woman who taught me everything I know about business and integrity, my mother, Lorraine Dubois. Mom, thank you for believing in my vision when no one else did. You are the real MVP. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Lorraine beamed, waving to the room with a false modesty that made my skin crawl. She stepped forward and kissed Tyrell on the cheek. It was a perfect picture of familial success, a lie wrapped in silk and diamonds. And that brings me to tonight's announcement, Tyrell said, his energy ramping up. Buying this penthouse and the new car, that is just the beginning. I am not just here to spend money. I am here to make money for all of you. He gestured to the blank screen behind him. Ladies and gentlemen, I am officially launching my proprietary cryptocurrency project. I call it Tyrell Coin. It is going to revolutionize the way we think about asset management in the Southeast. We are leveraging blockchain technology to create sustainable wealth for the next generation. And because you are all family and friends, I am opening the pre-sale round tonight right here in this room. He pulled a small remote from his pocket and clicked it. The screen behind him lit up with a flashy, amateurish logo of a golden T rotating in space. My buy-in is usually $50,000, Tyrell said, pacing the stage like a televangelist. But for tonight only, I am lowering the floor to 10,000. I want everyone in this room to ride this rocket ship with me. This is your chance to be part of something legendary. This is your chance to be self-made, just like me. The room buzzed with excitement. I saw people reaching for their checkbooks. I saw investors nodding, impressed by his confidence. He was doing it. He was actively soliciting funds for a Ponzi scheme based on a foundation of stolen money. If I didn't stop him now, these people would lose millions. I looked at the AV technician. He was distracted typing something into his phone, probably buying Tyrell Coin. I took one step to the left. I reached out and plugged a small wireless transmitter dongle into the open USB port on the side of the main media server. The technician didn't even blink. On my phone screen, the status bar turned from red to green. Connected. Admin access granted. Tyrell was reaching his crescendo. He was sweating now, high on the adrenaline of the con. People told me I couldn't do it, he shouted, his voice echoing off the marble walls. People said I was dreaming too big. My own family doubted me. But look around you. Look at this view. Look at this life. This isn't inherited wealth. This isn't luck. He pounded his chest with his fist. I built this empire with my own 2 hands, he declared. I made every dollar. I signed every check. And nobody gave me anything. He threw his arms up in a V for victory, waiting for the thunderous applause. Now, I whispered to myself. I pressed the large red execute button on my phone screen. The sound system let out a high-pitched screech of feedback that caused everyone in the room to cover their ears. Tyrell flinched, looking back at the technician in confusion. What is going on? Tyrell barked into the microphone. Fix the sound! But the technician was frantically tapping his keyboard, which was no longer responding. Then the lights in the room flickered and died. The penthouse was plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the city lights outside. The crowd gasped. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. "It is just a breaker," Tyrell shouted in the dark. "Don't worry, folks. Too much power in the room." Suddenly, the massive LED screen behind him roared back to life, but the golden logo of Tyrell Coin was gone. The screen was bright white, blindingly intense in the dark room. Tyrell turned around, shielding his eyes. "What is that? Turn it off?" The white faded, replaced by a stark, high-contrast graphic. It was a flowchart. Simple, brutal, undeniable. At the top, a photo of my grandfather Elijah Dubois. Next to it, a bank balance $500,000. An arrow pointed down to a second photo, my mother Lorraine. The text below her read unauthorized wire transfer. A second arrow pointed down to a third photo. It was Tyrell smiling in his new car. The text below him read, Tyrell Future LLC. And across the bottom of the screen, blinking in bold crimson letters, was a single phrase that sucked the air out of the room. Stolen property. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Tyrell stood frozen on stage, his silhouette dwarfed by the massive accusation glowing behind him. The self-made man was suddenly very small, and the spotlight I had just turned on was burning him alive. The blinding white light from the massive LED screen behind the stage was not just illumination. It was an interrogation lamp casting harsh, unforgiving shadows across Tyrell's face. He stood frozen, his arms still raised in his victory pose, looking like a statue of arrogance that was about to be toppled. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. The jazz music had cut out. The chatter of the socialites had died instantly. The only sound was the low electronic hum of the screen as the first slide of my presentation locked into place. I stood in the shadows by the AV booth, my finger hovering over the next button on my phone. I felt a cold, clinical satisfaction. Tyrell had spent the last 20 minutes weaving a fairy tale about grit and grinding. Now I was going to narrate the reality using the only language that mattered. Data. The first image on the screen was a high-resolution scan of a bank statement. It was magnified to 10 feet tall, making every number crisp and undeniable. At the top was a photograph of my grandfather Elijah Dubois. His face looked kind but stern, staring out at the room full of people drinking his champagne. Next to his photo was a bank balance. $500,000. The date stamp was clearly visible. It was dated 10 days ago. A collective murmur went through the crowd. They recognized the man. They respected the name. But they were confused. Why were they looking at a bank statement? I pressed the button on my phone. An animation played on the screen. A thick black arrow drew itself downward from Grandpa's photo. It did not point to a business investment. It did not point to a venture capital firm. It pointed to a second photo. My mother, Lorraine. The text underneath her photo was bold and black. Intermediary transfer. Unauthorized. The graphic showed the money leaving Grandpa's account and landing in a private holding account controlled solely by Lorraine. The date was the same day the wire was sent. Tyrell finally snapped out of his trance. He spun around, seeing the incriminating flowchart for the first time. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over the microphone stand. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "This is a hack! Someone cut the power!" But nobody moved. The audience was captivated. They were watching a live autopsy of a crime. I pressed the button again. The arrow moved again, snake-like and predatory. It left Lorraine's account and traveled down the screen to a third photo. It was the logo of Tyrell Future LLC, the shell company, the ghost ship. The graphic split into two distinct branches. On the left, the arrow pointed to a photo of the building we were currently standing in, the Aurelia. Underneath the photo was a copy of the wire confirmation. $250,000. Down payment. The timestamp was 48 hours ago. On the right, the arrow pointed to a stock photo of a McLaren 720S. Underneath was the dealership invoice, $180,000. Paid in full. The math was displayed at the bottom of the screen. Total stolen funds, $430,000. Remaining balance, $70,000. The room erupted. It wasn't the sound of applause. It was the sound of scandal. It was the sound of 100 wealthy, influential people realizing they had been invited to celebrate a felony. The investors who had been reaching for their checkbooks moments ago were now shoving them deep into their pockets. They looked at Tyrell not with admiration, but with the specific kind of disgust reserved for frauds. Tyrell looked at the screen, then at the audience. He opened his mouth to speak to spin another lie to claim it was a misunderstanding, but the numbers were too big. The evidence was too precise. He looked at Lorraine. Lorraine was standing near the front, her face a mask of pure terror. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at the faces of her friends, the women from her country club, the wives of the politicians. She saw the judgment in their eyes. She saw her carefully constructed reputation incinerating in real time. She took a step toward the stage, waving her hands frantically. "It is a lie," she shrieked, but her voice was swallowed by the murmurs of the crowd. I wasn't done. I had one final slide. The coup de grace. I pressed the button one last time. The flowchart faded. The screen went black for a heartbeat. Then it flashed red. A deep, violent crimson that bathed the entire room in the color of a warning light. Two words appeared in the center of the screen, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat. Stolen assets. Stolen assets. Stolen assets. The words were huge. They were inescapable. They branded the room, the furniture, the view, and the people standing on the stage. Becca was standing in the front row, directly in the wash of the red light. She looked like a ghost soaked in blood. She had been holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne, posing for photos just minutes before. She stared up at the words, her mouth hanging open. She looked at the guests who were now backing away from her as if she were contagious. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. The penthouse wasn't hers. The lifestyle wasn't hers. The ring on her finger was evidence. The dress on her back was contraband. The self-made hashtag was a digital footprint of a crime. Her hand went slack. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers. It hit the white marble floor with a sound that seemed louder than a gunshot. The crystal shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. The golden liquid splashed onto the hem of her white dress, staining it instantly. She didn't move to clean it up. She just stared at the broken glass, trembling. Tyrell saw the glass break. It broke him too. He dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a deafening thud that echoed through the sound system, a final punctuation mark to his career. I stepped out from behind the velvet drapes. I walked into the red light. I didn't say a word. I didn't need a microphone. The data had spoken for me. I stood there watching the chaos unfold, watching the investors flee toward the elevators, watching the photographers frantically snapping pictures of the breakdown instead of the breakthrough. My mother saw me. Her eyes locked onto mine across the room. There was no anger left in her face, only shock. She realized then that the quiet, boring data architect daughter she had dismissed for 30 years had just dismantled her entire life with a few lines of code. I looked at the screen one last time. Stolen assets. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever designed. The truth was out. The lie was dead, and the party was definitely over. The red light from the screen bathed the room in a color that felt violent and urgent. The words "stolen assets" pulsed behind Tyrell like a heartbeat, heavy and rhythmic. For a moment, the shock held everyone in place, suspended in a terrible silence. Then the spell broke, and it broke with the fury of a woman seeing her entire life disintegrate. Lorraine did not run. She charged. She moved through the crowd of stunned investors and socialites like a linebacker shoving people aside with a force that sent hors d'oeuvres flying. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. She scrambled up the 3 steps to the stage, her sequined gown catching on a monitor tearing at the hem. She didn't care. She lunged for the microphone Tyrell had dropped. She grabbed it, her fingernails scraping against the mesh grill, sending a harsh burst of static through the speakers that made everyone flinch. "Please, everyone, listen to me," Lorraine screamed, her voice shrill and breathless. She waved her free hand frantically at the screen behind her, as if she could physically wipe away the incriminating flowchart. "This is a mistake. This is a technical glitch. Can you not see what is happening? We are being hacked." She pointed a shaking finger into the darkness where I stood. "It is my daughter," she yelled, her eyes wild. "She is mentally unstable. She has been off her medication for months. She is jealous of her brother. She is trying to ruin his big night because she is a failure. She is a computer genius and she hacked the system to show these fake graphics. None of this is real." The crowd shifted uneasily. They looked at Lorraine, sweating and manic under the red light. Then they looked at the screen with its precise dates and bank codes. They were wealthy people. They understood money. And they knew that specific bank routing numbers were hard to fake in real time. Lorraine turned to Tyrell, grabbing his lapels and shaking him. "Tell them, Tyrell. Tell them it is a lie. Tell them you earned this money." Tyrell blinked, snapping out of his paralysis. He looked at the crowd, seeing the doubt in their eyes. His survival instinct kicked in, turning his fear into aggression. He scanned the room until he found me standing near the red velvet drapes. "Security!" Tyrell bellowed, his voice cracking. "Where is the building security? There is an intruder in the penthouse. She is trespassing. I want her removed immediately. Get her out of here before I throw her out myself." He started to move toward me, his fists clenched. He looked ready to violence. He needed a target, something to hit to make the numbers go away. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I reached into my purse and pulled out the wireless microphone I had taken from the AV booth earlier when the technician wasn't looking. I flipped the switch. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Tyrell," I said. My voice boomed through the overhead speakers, louder and clearer than his. The sound engineer, realizing the tide had turned, had cut Tyrell's mic and boosted mine. Tyrell froze halfway across the room. "You are trespassing," he spat, though he didn't take another step. "Get out of my house." I walked out of the shadows. The red light caught the silk of my crimson dress, making it look like liquid fire. I walked slowly toward the center of the room, parting the sea of guests, who backed away from me as if I were royalty. "Your house?" I asked, my tone conversational but deadly. "That is an interesting choice of words, Tyrell." I stopped in the middle of the room. I looked at Becca, who was still staring at the broken champagne glass. I looked at Lorraine, who was panting on the stage. Then I looked at the investors who were clutching their wallets. "Actually, I have a correction to make," I said, addressing the room. "My brother seems to be under the impression that he owns this penthouse. But according to the laws of this state, and specifically the doctrine of constructive trust, he is mistaken." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my clutch. I held it up. "This is a copy of the wire transfer instructions signed by our grandfather Elijah Dubois," I explained. "It contains a restrictive covenant. It states clearly that the funds used to purchase this property were a conditional gift. The condition was that the money must be used to purchase a primary residence, titled exclusively in the name of Maya Dubois." I turned to look at Tyrell. "Since you used my money to buy this apartment, Tyrell, the law views this asset as the fruit of a poisonous tree. You didn't buy a home. You just acted as my unauthorized real estate agent." I smiled, a cold, sharp expression. "So, technically speaking, you are not kicking me out of your house. You are standing in my living room, and frankly, I don't like what you have done with the decor." The room erupted in whispers. The legal logic was sound, and everyone knew it. I had just laid claim to the penthouse in front of 100 witnesses. Lorraine looked like she was going to be sick. She leaned against the podium for support. "You can't do this," she whispered into the dead microphone. "You can't humiliate us like this." "I am not humiliating you, Mother," I said. "I am just conducting a property walkthrough." Tyrell looked around the room. He saw the walls closing in. He saw his investors checking their phones, likely canceling transfers. He realized the game was over. The Tyrell coin, the penthouse, the image, it was all gone. He lunged. "I don't care what that paper says," he screamed, charging at me. "I will kill you." He got 2 steps before a loud, authoritative banging sound came from the front foyer. It wasn't a knock. It was a command. The heavy double doors of the penthouse, which had been propped open with a marble stopper, were pushed wide. Uniforms filled the entryway. Dark blue jackets with yellow lettering, badges flashing in the ambient light. "Police," a deep voice shouted. "Everybody stay where you are." 6 officers marched into the room. They weren't regular beat cops. These were detectives from the Economic Crimes Unit. I had called them an hour ago. I had told them that a major wire fraud suspect was hosting a public event and was a flight risk. The lead detective, a tall woman with a severe face, scanned the room. Her eyes landed on the stage. "Lorraine Dubois and Tyrell Dubois," she called out. Lorraine let out a small, strangled whimper. She tried to hide behind the podium, but there was nowhere to go. Tyrell stopped his charge. He looked at the police, then back at me. His face crumbled. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a terrified child. "We have warrants for your arrest," the detective announced, walking briskly through the crowd. "Charges of wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." Becca let out a scream. She scrambled backward, knocking over a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Not me," she yelled, pointing at her husband. "I didn't sign anything. It was him. He told me he was a genius. I didn't know he stole it." I watched as Becca threw Tyrell under the bus without a second of hesitation. It was poetic. The officers swarmed the stage. One of them grabbed Tyrell's arms and pulled them behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was loud and final. Another officer approached Lorraine. She tried to pull away, adjusting her dress, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. "Don't touch me," she hissed. "Do you know who I am?" "This is a misunderstanding. My daughter is confused." "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," the officer said, spinning her around. "I suggest you use it," I added softly. As they dragged my mother and brother past me, Tyrell looked at me. His eyes were filled with tears. "Maya, please," he begged. "Do something. Tell them it was a family dispute. Don't let them take me." I looked at him. I looked at the red dress I was wearing. "I can't help you, Tyrell," I said. "I am just a guest at your party." I turned back to the window, looking out at the city lights. Behind me, the sound of justice was loud and chaotic, but for the first time in my life, I felt nothing but peace. The house was mine. The money was accounted for. And the trash was finally being taken out. The chaos of the arrest was interrupted by a singular, clear sound. The chime of the elevator. It cut through the murmurs of the crowd and the drone of the police radios like a bell tolling for judgment. The silver doors slid open, and the silence that followed was heavier than the silence that had greeted my presentation. Standing there was not the frail, confused old man who had been spoon-fed applesauce by a corrupt nurse. Standing there was Elijah Dubois. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that fit him perfectly, a suit I hadn't seen him wear in 5 years. His silver hair was combed back. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He was holding a cane carved from ebony, but he wasn't leaning on it for support. He was holding it like a scepter. Beside him stood Mr. Henderson, looking like a proud bulldog ready to bite. My mother, who was currently having her wrists zip-tied by a police officer, let out a gasp that sounded like she had been punched in the gut. Her knees buckled, and the officer had to hold her up. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You are walking." Grandpa Elijah stepped out of the elevator. He didn't shuffle. He didn't stumble. He walked with the steady, rhythmic stride of the man who had built half the skyline visible out the window. He walked past the stunned investors. He walked past the terrified caterers. He walked straight toward the center of the room where his daughter and grandson were being detained. He stopped 3 feet away from Lorraine. He looked down at her, his eyes clear and sharp as diamonds. There was no fog of dementia in his gaze. There was only the cold fire of disappointment. "I am walking, Lorraine," he said, his voice deep and resonant. I have been walking every day while you were busy shopping. Lorraine began to cry messy, desperate tears. Dad, please tell them. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them I take care of you. Tell them I am your good daughter. Grandpa Elijah shook his head slowly. A good daughter does not drug her father. A good daughter does not isolate him from the world so she can rob him blind. A good daughter does not steal the future of her own child to feed the ego of another. He looked around the room, addressing the audience as if he were holding court. I have been playing a part, he announced. For 6 months, I let you all believe I was losing my mind. I let you feed me pills that I spit out in my napkin. I let you talk about me as if I were a piece of furniture in my own house. I wanted to see who you really were when you thought nobody was watching. He looked back at Lorraine. I saw everything, he said softly. I saw you sign the papers. I heard you laughing with the nurse about how easy it was to trick the old man. I saw you intercept the wire transfer I meant for Maya. Lorraine, you have failed. You failed as a fiduciary. You failed as a daughter. But worst of all, you failed as a mother. You sacrificed one child to spoil the other, and now you have lost them both. Lorraine sobbed, her body sagging against the police officer. I did it for the family, Dad. I did it to keep the name alive. You did it for yourself, Grandpa snapped. He turned his attention to Tyrell. My brother was pale, sweat dripping down his forehead, his hands cuffed behind his back. He looked at Grandpa with the eyes of a child who had been caught breaking a vase, hoping that a tearful apology would fix it. Grandpa, Tyrell pleaded. I didn't know. Mom told me she handled it. She told me you wanted me to have the money. I am a businessman, Grandpa, just like you. I was trying to build something. Grandpa Elijah laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. A businessman. You are not a businessman, Tyrell. You are a con artist with a line of credit. I worked construction for 40 years. I have calluses on my hands older than you. You think putting on a suit makes you a man. You think stealing $500,000 makes you a success. Grandpa took a step closer, invading Tyrell's space. I built my legacy on concrete and steel. You tried to build yours on lies and theft. You are a disappointment, son. You had every advantage, every door opened for you, and you chose to pick the lock instead of turning the handle. Tyrell looked down at his shoes, unable to meet the old man's gaze. The lead detective stepped forward, clearing her throat. Mr. Dubois, she said respectfully, we need to confirm for the record. Are you stating that you did not authorize the transfer of these funds to Tyrell Future LLC? Grandpa Elijah looked at the detective. He looked at his daughter. He looked at his grandson. For a second, I saw a flicker of pain in his eyes. It is not easy to condemn your own blood. But then he looked at me. He saw the red dress. He saw the woman who had fought for him when everyone else had written him off. He straightened his back. I am stating that the funds were stolen, he said clearly. I wish to press full charges against Lorraine Dubois and Tyrell Dubois for fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse. I will testify. My lawyer has all the documentation. Lorraine let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. No, Daddy. No. You can't send me to jail. Take them away, Grandpa said, turning his back on them. I have nothing more to say to these people. As the officers began to drag Tyrell and Lorraine toward the elevator, a commotion broke out near the front of the room. It was Becca. My sister-in-law had been standing frozen near the shattered champagne glass, watching her meal ticket get handcuffed. The reality of the situation had finally pierced through her denial. The penthouse was gone. The money was gone. The status was gone. And if she stayed attached to Tyrell, she would be dragged down with him. She moved quickly. She ran toward Tyrell as the officers were leading him past the white velvet sofa. Tyrell, she screamed. Tyrell looked up, hope flashing in his eyes. Becca, baby, call my lawyer. Tell them I am innocent. We can fix this. Becca stopped in front of him. She wasn't crying anymore. Her face was twisted into a snarl of pure disgust. Fix this, she yelled. You ruined everything. You told me you were rich. You told me you were a genius. You are nothing but a thief. She grabbed her left hand. She yanked the massive diamond ring off her finger. It was the ring Tyrell had bought 3 months ago, likely with another credit card he couldn't pay. She threw the ring at him. It hit him square in the chest and bounced off, skittering across the marble floor. "I want a divorce," Becca shouted. "I am not going to prison for you. You lied to me. You said you were a self-made man. You are a fraud." Tyrell looked at her, stunned. "Becca." "Don't talk to me!" she shrieked. She turned to the police officers. "I didn't know anything. I am a victim here. He tricked me too. I am leaving." She didn't wait for an answer. She hiked up her stained white dress and ran for the stairs, pushing past the confused guests, desperate to escape the sinking ship. She didn't look back at the husband she had vowed to love, for richer or poorer. The moment the richer turned to poorer, she was gone. Tyrell watched her go, his jaw hanging open. The realization that his wife loved his wallet, not him, hit him harder than the handcuffs. He slumped forward, defeated, letting the officers drag him into the elevator. The doors closed. The criminals were gone. The room was silent again. Grandpa Elijah stood in the center of the penthouse, leaning on his cane. He looked at the garish white furniture. He looked at the red warning on the screen. Then he looked at me and smiled. "It is a bit tacky, isn't it?" he asked, gesturing to the apartment. I walked over to him and took his arm. "It is terrible, Grandpa," I agreed, "but the view is nice." He patted my hand. "The view is much better now that the trash has been taken out. Come on, Maya. Let's go get some real food. I am starving and I refuse to eat these tiny sandwiches." We walked toward the elevator, leaving the stunned socialites of Atlanta behind in the wreckage of the worst housewarming party in history. We didn't look back. We had a future to build, and for the first time in a long time, the foundation was solid. The party was officially over, but the cleanup was just beginning. The penthouse, which just an hour ago had been vibrating with the energy of a coronation, now felt like a morgue. The red warning light on the screen had been turned off, leaving the room bathed in the harsh, unforgiving glare of the emergency house lights the building manager had flipped on. It exposed everything. It exposed the cheap quality of the velvet furniture Tyrell had bought. It exposed the frantic terror in the eyes of the guests who were trying to leave without being questioned. And it exposed the absolute ruin of the Dubois family name. I stood near the balcony, watching the officers finish processing my brother. Tyrell was no longer the confident CEO who had strutted across the stage. He was slumped against a marble pillar, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. The lead detective was reading him a list of charges that seemed to go on forever. It wasn't just the wire fraud regarding Grandpa's money. It was the crypto scheme. Apparently, my little demonstration with the flowcharts had given the police exactly the probable cause they needed to look deeper into Tyrell, future LLC. "You are also being charged with the sale of unregistered securities," the detective said, her voice cutting through the room. "We have reason to believe the Tyrell coin project fits the definition of a Ponzi scheme. Soliciting investments based on fraudulent assets is a felony, Mr. Dubois." Tyrell started to cry. It was a pathetic sniveling sound. "I didn't mean to," he sobbed, looking around for anyone who would listen. "I was just the face of the brand. I didn't know the compliance laws. I was going to pay everyone back once the coin took off. You have to believe me." The detective didn't blink. "That is something you can explain to a federal judge," she said. 2 officers hauled him up. As they walked him past the crowd of investors he had tried to swindle, Tyrell kept his head down. The same people who had cheered for him an hour ago were now looking at him with open hostility. One man, a prominent local developer, actually spit on the floor near Tyrell's feet as he passed. The self-made man was leaving the building in shackles, having made nothing but a mess. Then it was my mother's turn. Lorraine had been trying to negotiate with the officers near the kitchen island. She was using her most authoritative country club voice, the one she usually reserved for managers when she wanted to return a dress she had already worn. This is ridiculous, she was saying, pulling her arm away from a young officer. I demand to speak to your superior. I am Lorraine Dubois. I am the primary caregiver for my father. You cannot arrest me for taking care of my family finances. This is a civil matter. The officer wasn't impressed. He spun her around, not gently. Ma'am, we have a sworn affidavit from Elijah Dubois stating that you held him against his will and administered sedatives without a prescription to keep him compliant. That is not a civil matter. That is kidnapping and elder abuse. The word kidnapping sucked the air out of the room. The guests gasped. Lorraine's face went white. She looked over at Grandpa Elijah, who was sitting calmly on a white leather ottoman watching the proceedings with the patience of a saint. Daddy, tell them, Lorraine screamed, losing her composure entirely. Tell them I took care of you. I hired the best nurses. You hired jailers, Grandpa said quietly. And you paid them with my money. The click of the handcuffs on Lorraine's wrists was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a 30-year reign of terror coming to an end. She struggled, kicking out at the officer, her dignity completely gone. She looked wild, her hair coming loose from its perfect bun, her sequined dress twisted. As the police began to herd the prisoners toward the exit, I realized the room was still full of people. The guests were lingering, watching the drama like it was a reality show. They were drinking the last of the champagne, whispering behind their hands, taking photos of my mother in cuffs. I felt a surge of cold anger. This wasn't a show. This was my life. And this was my house. I walked to the center of the room. I didn't need a microphone this time. My voice projected clearly off the hard surfaces. The show is over, I announced. Every head turned to me. I stood tall in my red dress, the undisputed owner of the room. You are all trespassing, I said. This apartment belongs to me. The food you are eating was bought with stolen funds. The champagne you are drinking is evidence. I want everyone out. Now. A few people hesitated, looking offended. Did you not hear me? I asked, stepping closer. Get out. Unless you want to stay and give statements to the police about how you were planning to invest in a fraudulent cryptocurrency. I am sure the detective would love to take down your names. That got them moving. The threat of being associated with the fraud sent them scrambling for the door. The stampede was immediate. Women grabbed their purses, men grabbed their coats. Within 2 minutes, the penthouse was empty save for the police, Grandpa, me, and the 2 prisoners waiting for the elevator. I walked over to the elevator bank as the officers pressed the call button. Lorraine saw me coming. She stopped struggling. She looked at me with eyes that were red and swollen. For a second, I thought she might apologize. I thought that maybe now that she had lost everything, she would finally see me. Maya, she whimpered. I stopped a few feet away. I crossed my arms. Maya, please, she begged, her voice cracking. You can't let them take me. I am your mother. I said nothing. I just watched her. I did it for us. She cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. I did it for the family. We were drowning, Maya. The estate cost so much to maintain. The taxes, the repairs. I was just trying to keep the Dubois name alive. I wanted Tyrell to succeed so he could support us all. I did everything for this family. How can you be so cruel? How can you be so heartless? She leaned forward, straining against the cuffs. I sacrificed my life for you children, she screamed. And this is how you repay me, by sending me to jail. You are a monster. Maya, I looked at this woman who had gaslit my grandfather, spoiled my brother, and ignored me for 3 decades. I looked at the woman who had slapped me in the library and threatened to destroy my reputation. I took a step closer. I looked her dead in the eye. You didn't do it for the family, Lorraine, I said softly. She froze, waiting for my absolution. You did it for your vanity, I continued. You did it because you couldn't stand the thought of losing your status. You did it because you wanted to be the mother of a rich son more than you wanted to be the mother of a good son. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. You sacrificed Grandpa to buy a car. You sacrificed me to buy a condo. That isn't love, Mother. That is a transaction. And you just went bankrupt. Lorraine stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The truth hit her harder than any slap. She realized I saw right through her. There was no noble sacrifice. There was just greed and a desperate need to be envied by strangers. The elevator doors opened. The officers nudged her forward. Lorraine looked back at me one last time. Her eyes were empty. The Queen was dead. Goodbye, Mother, I said. She was shoved into the elevator next to a weeping Tyrell. The doors slid shut, cutting off her sobbing. I stared at the brushed steel doors for a long moment. I expected to feel sad. I expected to feel guilty, but all I felt was the silence, the beautiful heavy silence of a problem that had finally been solved. I turned around. Grandpa Elijah was standing there leaning on his cane. He had watched the whole thing. He nodded at me. It was a nod of respect. "Is it done?" he asked. I looked around the empty penthouse. The white furniture, the marble floors, the panoramic view of the city. It was all mine now. Legally. Morally. "It is done, Grandpa," I said. "Then let's go," he said, turning toward the door. "This place has no soul, and I think I saw a Waffle House down the street. I want breakfast." I laughed. It was the first time I had genuinely laughed in a week. I walked over and took his arm. "Waffles sound perfect," I said. We walked out of the penthouse, leaving the lights on. I didn't care about the electric bill. I could afford it. I had $500,000 in equity, and for the first time in my life, I had my freedom. The sale of the penthouse at the Aurelia closed in 48 hours. I did not haggle over the price. I just wanted it gone. Every time I looked at that white marble floor, I saw the ghost of my sister-in-law dropping her champagne glass. Every time I looked at the view, I saw Tyrell's desperate, arrogant face lying to a room full of people. It was not a home. It was a mausoleum of greed. I sold it fully furnished, leaving behind the velvet sofas and the pretentious art. I wanted nothing from that life attached to me. The McLaren sold even faster. A collector from Miami bought it for cash. I used the proceeds to pay off the immediate legal fees for the estate and to reimburse the investors who had been duped by the Tyrell coin presale. I didn't have to do that. Legally, that was Tyrell's debt. But Grandpa insisted. He said a Dubois pays what is owed, even if the debt was created by a thief. It cleaned the ledger. It washed our name. With the remaining funds from the penthouse sale and the original wire transfer that was finally legally in my possession, I went house hunting. I didn't look at skyscrapers. I didn't look at gated communities with homeowners associations that police your lawn height. I looked north past the city limits where the noise of Atlanta fades into the hum of cicadas and wind in the pines. We found a ranch-style house in Marietta. It sits on 4 acres of land. It has wide hallways that are perfect for a wheelchair, though Grandpa uses his cane most days now. It has a wrap-around porch made of cedar that smells like rain when it gets wet. It has a garden that was overgrown but full of potential. It costs 1/3 of what the penthouse cost, but it feels 10 times richer. I moved Grandpa in on a Tuesday. Watching him sit on the porch, watching the birds at the feeder, I saw his shoulders drop for the first time in years. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He wasn't guarding his wallet. He was just an old man enjoying the sunset. The silence from the rest of the family was deafening, but I kept tabs on them. I needed to know the threat was neutralized. Tyrell is currently being held at the county detention center while he awaits trial. His bail was set at $2 million, a figure the judge chose specifically because of the flight risk. Tyrell called me once collect. I accepted the call just to hear him. He sounded small. He sounded broken. He told me that Becca had visited him once, not to bring him support but to have him sign divorce papers. And then he told me the kicker. Before she ran, Becca had accessed their joint checking account. She withdrew the $40,000 of cash he had stashed there from his initial scams. She took it all. She left him with $0 for his canteen fund and a lawyer he couldn't afford. The self-made man was now penniless, wifeless, and facing 10 years in federal prison. Lorraine fared slightly better in the eyes of the law, but worse in the eyes of society. Because she cooperated with the investigation into Tyrell to save her own skin, she was granted bail. But the conditions were severe. She is wearing an ankle monitor. Her passport is surrendered. And Mr. Henderson, being the shark that he is, successfully petitioned the court to strip her of any claim to the Dubois estate. She was disinherited. The mansion was seized by the bank to pay off the mortgages she had secretly taken out. My mother is currently living in a one-bedroom apartment above a garage in a neighborhood she used to make fun of. But the real justice, the poetic justice, happened last week. I needed groceries. I drove to the supermarket on the edge of town, the discount one. I walked down the aisle pushing my cart, and I saw her. Lorraine was standing at register 4. She was wearing a polyester vest that was too tight. Her hair, usually dyed and blown out, was showing gray roots, and was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was scanning a bag of frozen peas for a woman who was yelling at her about a coupon. I stood there behind a display of cereal boxes and watched. I watched the woman who used to snap her fingers at waiters, now having to apologize for a scanning error. I watched the woman who claimed she was the Queen of Atlanta beg a manager for a break. She looked tired. She looked defeated. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had traded her family for money and ended up with neither. She didn't see me. I didn't walk through her line. I turned my cart around and walked out. I didn't need to say anything. Her life was her sentence. Now 30 days later, the sun is warm on my face. I am sitting on a wooden dock at the edge of the small lake behind our new property. The water is still reflecting the blue sky. Next to me, Grandpa Elijah is baiting a hook. His hands are steady. He is wearing a bucket hat and an old flannel shirt. He casts the line into the water. The bobber lands with a soft plop. Ripples spread out, disturbing the reflection for a moment before the water calms again. "You know, Maya," he says softly, keeping his eyes on the water, "I never liked that penthouse view. Too high up. You can't see the ground." I smile, leaning back on my hands. "I know, Grandpa. It was cold." "This is better," he says. "Real dirt, real water, real quiet." We sit there for a long time without speaking. We don't need to talk about Lorraine. We don't need to talk about Tyrell. They are part of a past that feels like a bad dream. We just watch the water. We listen to the wind. For the first time in my life, I don't feel like I have to prove anything. I don't have to be the smart one or the quiet one or the successful one. I am just Maya. And I am home. Grandpa's line tugs. He laughs, a deep, genuine sound that scares a duck nearby. "I got one," he says, reeling it in. I watch him fight the fish, his eyes sparkling with joy. This is what the $500,000 bought. It didn't buy a car. It didn't buy status. It bought this afternoon. It bought this peace. And it was worth every single penny. They say money changes people. I used to believe that. I used to think that wealth was a corrupting force that turned good hearts black. But sitting here on the dock, watching the sun dip below the tree line, I realize that is a lie. Money doesn't change people. Money is a magnifying glass. It reveals exactly who you already are. When my mother got access to money, it revealed her insecurity and her greed. When Tyrell got access to money, it revealed his arrogance and his laziness. They didn't become bad people because of the cash. The cash just gave them the fuel to burn brighter in their toxicity. And me. What did the money reveal about me? It revealed that I am a builder. Not of buildings, but of foundations. I didn't keep the rest of the inheritance. After buying the house and securing Grandpa's medical care fund, there was still a significant amount left. I sat down with Mr. Henderson and we drew up the paperwork for a new trust. We called it the Elijah Dubois Future Fund. It is a scholarship program, but it is not for the valedictorians or the star athletes. It is for the invisible kids, the ones who sit in the back of the class, the ones who are practical, quiet, and overlooked, the ones who have big families that drain them dry. It provides full tuition for students pursuing degrees in data science engineering and architecture. But the application has one specific question. What does family mean to you? I read the first batch of essays yesterday. There was one from a girl in Chicago. She wrote that family isn't about blood. She wrote that family are the people who spot you when you are lifting a heavy weight, not the ones who add more weight to the bar to see if you will break. She is getting the first full ride. I learned that lesson the hard way. I paid $257,000 in emotional labor, humiliation, and betrayal to learn it. I lost a mother. I lost a brother. I lost the illusion of the perfect holiday dinner. But I gained the truth. Family is not an obligation. It is a choice. You do not owe anyone your sanity just because you share a last name. You do not owe anyone your financial security just because they failed to secure their own. Respect is the only currency that matters in a relationship. If they can't pay you with respect, you stop doing business with them. I looked over at Grandpa. He had released the fish back into the water. He was wiping his hands on a rag, humming an old hymn. He chose me. When everyone else wrote him off, I chose him. And in the end, we saved each other. My phone buzzed on the wooden dock beside me. I glanced down. It was an unknown number with a Texas area code. I picked it up, expecting a telemarketer. "Hello, is this Maya Dubois?" a shrill voice demanded. It sounded like sandpaper on glass. "Yes," I said calmly. "Who is this?" "This is Karen, Becca's aunt." I almost laughed. Of course, the flying monkeys were arriving. "You listen to me, you witch!" the woman screamed into the phone. "You ruined my niece's life. She is in Miami with nothing. She is traumatized. We are going to sue you for emotional distress. We are going to sue you for defamation. You can't just kick people out on the street. We are coming for you, Maya. Do you hear me? We are coming for everything you have." I looked at the lake. I looked at the trees. I looked at my grandfather who was watching me with a curious smile. I didn't feel my heart race. I didn't feel fear. I felt bored. "Karen," I said, my voice steady and cool as the water below my feet. What? She snapped. "I have a very good lawyer named Arthur Henderson. He eats people like you for breakfast." I paused, letting the silence hang. "And Karen, what? Tell Becca I said hello. And tell her she forgot her ring." "I pawned it this morning. It paid for the fish bait." I didn't wait for her response. I pressed the red button and ended the call. I turned the phone off. I placed it face down on the wood. "Who was that?" Grandpa asked. "Nobody," I said, smiling at him. "Just a wrong number." I picked up my fishing pole. The water was calm. The air was sweet. And for the first time, my line was clear. The drama was over. The story was mine to write now. And I was going to write a happy ending. This story reveals a harsh but liberating truth. Money is a magnifying glass that exposes who people really are. Maya's journey proves that shared DNA is not a suicide pact, nor is it a license for abuse. For years, she confused exploitation with loyalty, only to realize that true family is defined by protection, not predation. We learn that setting boundaries isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of survival. Your value isn't determined by what you can give to those who drain you, but by the peace you build when you finally dare to walk away. If you believe that respect is the only currency that matters in a relationship, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. Share this video to remind someone that it is never too late to reclaim your freedom.